And it was then that also side of looking at Masters of the Sun and saying, hey, what if we do a comic book, build it into an AR app, and then that AR app is actually a game, and that when you play the game, you own the NFTs. This was 2018. So we were like talking about gaming and NFTs and world building and metaverse, like massive metaverse game building in 2018 with interoperability of how we would bring it from this lightweight AR game and your character that you could then carry over into a large sort of Grand Theft Auto game. And I was always pushing us, let's get it right first on the smaller scale.
You're listening to Lights, Camera, Crypto, the podcast exploring all things entertainment and Web3. I'm your host, Stephen Ladden, and this week our guest is comic book writer and filmmaker B. Earl. In this episode, B details his path through the entertainment industry, ultimately leading to working for Marvel on some of its largest comic book franchises, Masters of the Sun and Deadly Neighborhood Spider-Man, to name a few. He also gives us more insight into working with his creative partner, Taboo of Black Eyed Peas, and how their storytelling process focuses on telling stories from underrepresented points of view. B also has an incredible background in tech, and that has proven in conjunction with his storytelling skill sets to be super valuable for a variety of Web3 clients, predominantly in the space of strategy and collectibles, which he advises an assortment of clients on, predominantly Sideshow. Let's take a listen to this week's episode. Ben, welcome to the podcast.
I am so excited to be here.
Excited to have you. And growing up, did you always know that you wanted to be a comic book writer? Did you know you wanted to be a filmmaker? Was that part of your desires as a youth, or did that come later?
I always wanted to be a storyteller. I think that was really born into my bones, I guess you could say. And be an artist and a creative was always something that I really enjoyed ever since I was little. I grew up without a TV, so we didn't really have that sort of constant stimulation. So for me, it was having to create my own ideas, stories, and whatever, and playing with Legos and building big adventures and G.I. Joe and toys. And it wasn't really, I always loved drawing. And I thought I was going to become a comic book artist at one point in my life. And at 11, I was really just dreaming of being a Marvel comic artist. That was around the time when I really discovered the X-Men and Jim Lee and Chris Claremont and all of those incredible writers and artists. And I was just enamored by the storytelling in comics. And it was very much connected to what I was loving as a kid was mythology. And I just read the Bible all the time. Like I had this, and it's not like we were being like, it wasn't like we were in a religious household. I just had this Old Testament Bible that my grandfather had given me. And it was like a kid's one. And I just thought the stories were awesome. They were just so adventurous and cool and exciting. Getting to know the Old Testament as a kid, I was like, these are awesome adventures. And then reading comics was like, oh, this is a natural progression. We've got Greek myths and Celtic tales and Italian fables, all these books I was reading. And that really sparked me when I started getting into comics. So it definitely was something that was in me. I got away from it as I went into music. I fell in love with making music. And my dad is a painter and a sculptor and also was a songwriter, or is a songwriter. And on top of being a computer scientist and technical writer. And so I think it's funny because I look at it and I go, wow, I am my father's son, sometimes for better or worse, but as we all are, right? We all go through those trials and tribulations. But it was music that really put me on my trajectory to filmmaking because I wanted to write music for film. And that was really a big thing that I was thinking was going, oh, this is what I would love to do. And this was the early 90s, and I was really into like house. It wasn't even house, it was techno. It was just straight up electronica. It was electronic music. I had Rebirth and I had an old 4-track, and I would just sit up in my attic every day after school and just make weird sounds and music. And then just segueing into really what sparked wanting to make movies was my mom had brought home a book, J. Michael Straczynski's book on screenwriting. And I was
Mm.
probably around 15 or 16. And she got it from my sister because she thought my sister was going to be the writer of the family. And I was like the musical weirdo upstairs hitting
Sure.
digital play buttons. But I read that book and it really inspired me. And I was also going through a traumatic time with my calculus teacher. And I was always such a good student. And all she wanted to do was fail us it was a weird that's a long roundabout story. She just was an anyway that but it inspired me to write a script that was very much like Teaching Mrs. Tingle, if you remember that, where the teacher loses their mind and then he holds all the kids hostage. So that was my very first screenplay I wrote by hand, the whole thing. And I still have it, the whole thing is written by hand. So that was the beginning. So there you go, that's a long roundabout.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so much to unpack. Just out of curiosity, did you ever make the screenplay, or has it forever been an unproduced
Forever
work in your
unseen.
possession? Yeah.
Forever unclean. It's funny. That script was the thing that sort of sparked me, but it was interesting because it made me realize that I was destined to become a film editor, at least starting my career, because I was always marrying music and visuals together, even in
Mm.
my writing. I didn't realize that was a big part of when you're editing the picture. You start throwing different palettes and soundtracks and temp music and whatever. And that was something that for me, it was really such a big part of my storytelling was connecting visual and sonic together. That was that was a fun time. But then I went to school for biochem and threw away all my film dreams freshman year.
And how did you get on that path when you were so passionate about music and film and writing and all of those things?
Going back to the father part, my dad was like, I don't want you to be an artist. You'll forever struggle. It will be the hardest life. And then he was like, pharmaceuticals are the way to go and go into biochem. And I was good enough at math, but I enjoyed science and I enjoyed chemistry. But I always had this passion for poetry, and I was like doing slam poetry that whole time and playing in bands. And I'm like, all right, I guess, fine, whatever. I'll listen to you. So I went to college as a biochem major, and then my Spanish, he was my guidance counselor freshman year. He was the Spanish professor, Dr. Cameron Douglas. Pretty sure that was his name. I'll never forget him. I'll never forget his face because I remember sitting in his office and he said, really, what do you want to do with your life? And I was like, I'm so passionate about making movies. And I feel like if I could just go and make a lot of money as a biochemist and working in those fields, then maybe I can do movies as a side job. He's like, oh, why would you throw away the thing that you love? And why wouldn't you do the thing that you love? Like, why would you? And so I said, how would I even go about that? And he said, look, this book just came out. It's Rebel Without a Crew. And he said, read this. Robert Rodriguez, Rebel Without a Crew. This is how he made a movie for next to nothing. Because I was like, how do I even get into Hollywood? How would I even start? Where would I go make a movie? What? Every single question.
Right.
So I read that book and I was just like really so inspired. And it made me change my major to the school didn't have a film major, so it was English. So I changed my major to English and really focused in English and writing and history and not so much philosophy, though that came later in my life, but I was always interested in that. And then I basically took a bunch of my college money that my grandfather left me to go and buy a Final Cut Pro editing software, which was Final Cut 1,
Nice. Yeah.
and a little camera. And I just started shooting little movies. And like every young filmmaker, we didn't have the iPhones back then. We weren't
Right.
able to the tech was very different. But yeah, I mean it's interesting because looking at it like from this standpoint of tech, right? Technology has really allowed sort of opportunities for artists and creatives to really embrace their passions without having to be at the mercy of a studio that has tons of money or whatever. You don't even now, it's so much more now. You can record an entire song on your phone and
Yeah.
put it out on SoundCloud and it can sound really good. That's incredible. So yeah, that was my early years, man.
So in many ways, then the inspiration comes from the book to get you pursued, you listened to dad
Yeah.
as a kid. Yeah, but it's that this in itself, it sounds like your journey is poetic. So as a kid, you're following in your father's footsteps artistically, at least pursuing things.
Right.
He's exercising that part of his mind, and you're seeing that, and you're absorbing that in your own way. And then you're also listening to dad when he says, go
Right.
find a career that will pay the bills, basically. And then you end up ultimately listening to yourself, which then brings you closer to a career path that dad had. Not to make this about you and your dad, but there's, you
There
know,
absolutely is. And it really is so much about the father son sort of journey. What does it mean to become a man in this day and age? And that sort of ritual. And whether you look at the religious ritual of it, a bar mitzvah or a confirmation or whatever religious sort of ritual, or that sort of moment where you are able to sort of take the onus on yourself and say, this is who I am and this is what I want. And this is the journey that I'm going to take. It's the fool's journey. It is the
yeah,
tarot deck, right? I mean, it's the zero card, and that's the beginning. And you start on that journey as the fool, and then you become the magician and move through to the empress and onward to the high priestess, then empress, and you begin that journey. It's very poetic, and it's what Jodorowsky, if we talk film, right? That's so much of his filmmaking follows the tarot journeys, and he even made his own tarot deck. I'm obsessed
mm,
with tarot, by the way. Side note, I started reading when I was 11. I got my first
wow,
Rider-Waite deck. So I don't know if you can see behind me, but I just have all these tarot decks back there, and yeah, the
awesome.
Super Oracle deck. Yeah, I just look at it as like guidance for symbols. Poetry is symbols and metaphor, and myth is the same, and it really connects to the journey that I've always been on. Was
Mm.
the myths and symbols of religious texts and everything I grew up on as a kid, and then turned into reading comic books, which is modern heroes, modern gods that we look to and say that's what we're aspiring to. And those are the journeys that we aspire to and how we want to be.
And how much of that, call it early spirituality or fascination with a higher power, whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
universe, God, stuff like that. How
Yeah.
much do you think that both allowed you to relate to, like, to see the connections from, call it the biblical stories and modern day superheroes, and see that inherently it's we're talking about these same narratives just in a different way.
100%. What you're talking about is modern mythology in our era, right? And for a kid growing up, you're looking to heroes and gods. And I was raised Jewish and Catholic, and I went to Catholic school, but then also was having Seder. And at a time, I started out as an altar boy, because for me, being an altar boy allowed me to, one, get out of school, but also we got paid when we did funerals and weddings. I'm the Jewish kid doing funerals and weddings so I can buy my comic books. It's very poetic there as well. But it was a very interesting sort of growing up, because my dad was very much into Eastern Asian studies and Mongolian studies and shamanism. And that was what his
Mm.
focus was. So he was always talking to us about shamans, and Jesus was a shaman and a prophet. And so I'm like growing up with this very sort of strange understanding of what is this sort of Catholic, this mystical Catholic faith, and then also this sort of mystical Jewish faith. And where is this overlap? Obviously,
Mm.
Judaism is the sort of granddaddy of all the religions, all the desert religions, right? So you really start there. And then all of the religions basically are saying very similar things. You have Moses in the Quran. This is all interwoven and all interconnected, and really is just how we look at these stories and lens them. And unfortunately, sometimes when we get so caught up in our own narratives, our own codexes, our own boxes of books, we miss the larger picture of we're all human and trying to connect. So I think that was
Right.
something for me as a kid. I saw that and I was just like, well, why do we have to look at the differences? Why can't we look at the similarities? And why can't we look at the ideologies? And why do we have to believe that there's this male figure, this God that's telling me that I'm going to hell if I do this and that? And it's a great
Yeah.
story, man. But
Yeah.
like at the end of the day, what does that even mean? Like I was such a literalist. Like in third or fourth grade, like our teachers would say to us, "Pray every night to Jesus. He's inside of you." And I literally thought Jesus was in my belly. I would pray to my stomach. And then I would be a good Jew and I would pray to God. And so I was like trying to cover my bases.
Nothing was slipping through the cracks with your prayers. You had it
No,
on
man,
lock.
I was on point. But then I really found mysticism and spirituality and like this other side to it, magic. I was obsessed with magic and alchemy when I was 11, 12, 13. I thought I was, yeah, I found a book on alchemy at the library. That was all we would do every week. My mom would take us to the library, and that was like our TV. We'd get our big stack of books. And I found this book on alchemy. And I was like, this is cool, magic and alchemy. And this is what I want to do, alchemist.
Dude,
So,
which amazing book
The
by the
Alchemist
way.
by Colin Crouch.
Yeah. How fascinating. And I think you touched on something really interesting, which is how there's often, especially a polarizing climate like you could argue is today, but I guess it's really in any generation. There is a lot of focus on differences, and yet I have thought the same thing as a kid. It's like you have all these different big religions, and yet they're all preaching, if you get down to the brass tacks, relatively some of the same things. So it's like, what's uniting all of these things together? What that's probably closer to the, if you are searching for some sort of truth, maybe look where all of these different circles intersect. And
I mean, it's the Venn diagram of humanity.
yeah,
We are searching for a truth, a universal truth of being and experience. And I think the reality of us, it's funny, I don't want to jump too far ahead. I know we're bouncing around a little bit, but I was always Campbell, obviously everybody, oh, the hero with a thousand faces and Campbell. I have this doc of Campbell. It's like a 6-part series. I just always go back to it and watch it. It's him and Bill Moyers. I don't know if you've seen it. It's great, but it's also funny because Campbell's on so many great things, but there's also a lot of things that I feel that he misses because he really often discredits the youth for really having anchors. And because, again, he was raised a Catholic and he then found his own path of spirituality through myth and through storytelling and through native myths and all these different, and Indian and all these different practices. That also is all based on Jung. And you've got all of the dream theories and the unconscious and the anima and animus and the collective unconscious, subconscious, all that stuff. And the Spider-Man series that we've been doing, that is absolutely my homage to Jung and Campbell and dream theory. It's all about modern mythology and about how Spider-Man ultimately has to kill himself. He has to kill the hero in order to destroy the ego and to be able to let himself go so that he can pass the stories on to the next generation. And
wow,
that's the story in a nutshell. And obviously, it's got all the trappings of a Marvel
sure,
superhero story.
sure.
And Juan Ferreira is just this incredible artist who just captured everything beyond I could even imagine. And that's the beauty of it. I've been very blessed to be working with Taboo on our creative journey, connecting in native mythologies and being able to be that conduit, taking native myths, taking native storytelling, and really bridging that into opportunities for new writers and new creatives that come from native and First Nations backgrounds to take characters that we've been creating and ultimately expound on them and build on them and weave that into the Marvel narrative. That's
Wow.
the goal. That's really the goal that Tab and I have been doing. I look at it as platform building. That's what we always talk about, is really finding ways to give those opportunities by creating new characters like Jake Gomez in our Werewolf by Night series, this new character Crystal Catani in the Spider-Man, the Deadly Neighborhood Spider-Man series. And you'll see that she becomes a very important character in issue 5, which comes out very soon. I think it's the end of this month, but I know I don't want to date this podcast, but
Sure, sure.
but let's make it evergreen. So anyway, but that to me is what I love in storytelling, is finding ways to weave in the spiritual narratives, these sort of unconscious narratives, these connections to mythologies that all have touch points of creation stories and connection to nature and connection to ourselves. And that's
Mm.
my goal, is finding the way to relate it into a new sort of medium, being whether it's comic books or modernize it. I don't know. It's funny because when I'm writing, I feel very much like I'm just chronicling something that's coming through me. I'm not
Mm.
really creating it. I feel like it's not. It is, but it's not. I remember when we had to come up with a pitch for Kashala, and I was like, all right, what are we going to do with this one? And at the time, we didn't have Doctor Doom as our villain. And I was trying to think of what is the story I want to tell about this. She's a sorcerer supreme and she's a ghost rider. And what is that story I want to tell? And then all of a sudden I just was like walking with my son and I saw Hollywood and LA all underwater. And I just saw like the freaking Hollywood sign, but it wasn't. It was just the top. You saw water and then you saw these cubes, but they were all equally spaced apart. And you're like, what are those cubes? And then and I pictured it because it's Infinity Comic. And I was like, as you scroll, you realize that the cubes are the top of the Hollywood sign and the whole thing is underwater. And that she's basically melted the ice caps because she's this ghost rider. And so
Wow.
anyway, yeah, crazy stories, man.
So, but again, man, it's really cool to get more insight into sort of the influences that you have creatively and the bedrock, you could say, of that philosophical mystic mind. And then
The magic.
also the magic. Yeah, exactly. And it sounds like part of that process is also just letting, like, you're transmuting more than you're creating, perhaps.
I absolutely think that is the case. Alchemy, I guess, in some ways, is really that, right? You're taking these different elements and turning them into something entirely different, just like chemistry. It's funny to think back, I never even thought of it. Chemi is an Arabic word, and that's where chemistry came from. And it also was the beginnings of alchemy. It was so I guess in some way I never stopped being a chemist. I guess I just
Mm.
changed my chemistry.
Which, and so in many ways, then too, that early path, if you will, to that is all relevant and has helped shape the ingredients, or has helped be a part of the ingredients that have led to everything we've just talked about. Which,
Yeah.
on that trajectory, so you've gone through to school, you've made your first, started making your films, you've nailed in that filmmaking, writing, comic book writing. That is the path. Having gone through perhaps a more scientific journey initially, what was the first sort of experience or moment that you had that validated that making that decision was the right one for you?
So when I got the filming equipment to go and shoot, I remembered I was like, all right, cool. I can make all these little fun short films with my friends and my family and my college roommates and whatever. But what is the thing? Like, how do I make something a little bit more? How do I really cut my teeth? And my cousin sent me this blog bulletin. This was like, I want to say 1999 of Columbia College. And it was just all these postings. And I saw one, production assistants needed for documentary film. And I was like, cool. Or is interns needed? It wasn't even production assistants, it was like interns needed. I was like, all right, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just going to submit my name to these folks who are doing some documentary and I have no idea what it is. And I sent that in and I connected up with this guy, Konstantin Valhuli, and his sister, Christina. And they were doing a documentary on plus size modeling. And they had already been shooting for a bit. And I was like, I've got this camera. And at that time, actually, I bought an XL1S because I had done a job that had paid for the XL1S. It was like, all right, man, I'm like, I can do pro stuff now. I feel confident, like, whatever. So I joined up with them. They were up in New York, and I started shooting around like B-roll stuff on this documentary. So the documentary finished. It got accepted to some film festivals, and we went to Newport Film Festival, and it didn't win anything, I don't think. But got some recognition, and from that we said, let's go make a documentary about comic books. And this was the first time where it was like really just me and Constantine and this woman, Catherine Schuler, who was our sort of executive producer, she was the widow of Mark Grunwald, Marvel Comics. Mark Grunwald was from Marvel, and then Peter Sanderson, who at the time he had been Marvel's historian. So this was my first introduction really into comics, like in the professional sense. So I started going and getting to interview all of these comic book creators. And this was 2000, 2001. And this was
Wow.
before comic book movies blew up. This was like so I'm interviewing Frank Miller, Chris Claremont, Stan Lee. I didn't get to interview Stan on that one. Jimmy Palmiotti and Amanda Connor, John Byrne, Peter David. The list was incredible. We got in with every single person. And it was just this really incredible experience. It wasn't paid. I was shooting the whole thing. I was traveling all over New York and Connecticut and all over the East Coast. And then I edited the film in my bedroom while going to school during the day. So it was like college in the day, edit the film at night.
Wow.
Skip classes to go to New York on the train or the Greyhound.
Yeah.
It's the filmmakers. Yeah, I was doing it at night, man. So we finished the film. It screened at the New York Film Anthology Archives. And it was just that moment of seeing the film that was crafted in my bedroom on a giant screen. And my parents were there. And I remember my dad came up and he said, I get why you like comic books. And I understand that these guys and gals that are writing and drawing comic books and making these stories that you love are really intelligent people and really care about their craft. So I get it. Like and it was funny because when I was making that film, I was really thinking about, I'm making this for my parents. In a weird way, it was like, I'm making this for my parents so that when they watch it, they understand why I love comics and why I love movies. But at the end of the day, really what inspired me to love comics at such a young age. And I never thought that I was going to be a Marvel writer. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to go off and laser focus going to be Marvel writer. At the time, I was like, I'm going to be a filmmaker. And I met Larry Cohen at the premiere of our documentary. And Larry Cohen, who did It's Alive, at the time he was in town doing Phone Booth. If you remember that movie from back in the day, Colin Farrell.
Colin Farrell.
Yeah, so Larry wrote Phone Booth, and Larry said, "Hey kid, I want to see your doc. This is back, print a VHS for me, and I'll watch it." So I sent him a VHS. And he watched it and he said, "Hey, we got a screening of It's Alive up at the Lincoln Center. Come up and watch the movie with me. I want to talk to you about making a picture together." And I was like, wow, okay.
Wow.
I'm 21, 22 years old. I was like, I'm Robert Rodriguez. I did it. I thought at that time I was on Robert's trajectory, right? I was like, yeah, I'm going to be doing El Mariachi. Yeah, here comes my Desperado. But what happened was Larry sent me two scripts. This one called Captivity I loved because I saw how I could do it and we could shoot at very low budget. And at the time, I was interning in Philadelphia at a television production company called Banyan, doing reality TV. And Larry was like, "Hey, let's go make this picture." So I said, "All right, I'm moving to New York." I had no idea how I was going to live there and had no idea how I was going to pay the bills. I just figured I put it out there. And this woman I was working with, Suzette, she said, "Hey, I got this apartment that I can sublet if you really are looking to move. It's opening up in January." And this was probably like November or October. And I said, "I'll take it." And it was like $830 a month, okay, in 23rd and 8th. I don't know if, in Chelsea, right in the heart of Manhattan.
Sure.
It was like, what? Here I am, 22 years old, 23, like going, all right, I'm moving to New York. It's happening. We're going to make a movie. Life is on track, man. This is going the right direction. But as life does, we never made the picture. Larry ended up selling the script to Mark Damon, and Alicia Cuthbert stars in it. And you could go pick it up at your local video store if you still have one. No, I'm just kidding. Actually, one just opened here in Burbank. That's another story. But yeah, it wasn't the movie I wanted to make, that's for sure. But it showed me that I was on the right track. That's what it showed me.
So it validated the early efforts and demonstrated, as you said, you had made the right choices to get to where you were going.
Yeah. That's the long. I gave you the long version. Very succinct. Thank you.
Those details are necessary, though. We need the color and the experience, because within that is the high, the low, and also all through it is perseverance. And I think what the nugget that at least I'm taking from it is following your interests, pursuing what you want to pursue, and you said it. You're like, I didn't know how I was going to make it happen, and I think it's when you take those steps in life that are aligned with what you're supposed to be doing, whatever we call it, purpose. The rent, the sublet appears, and even if the end goal doesn't rock, it's still helping move you forward.
I think that's really been my sort of mantra in life, that things will work out somehow if I just put my head and towards where I'm going. If I face in the direction I feel is calling me, it'll work out and some door will open. Or there will be an opportunity that will show me, okay, this is the right path, this is the right direction. Again, it is the fool's journey. And that's the journey of the tarot. You are on this strange journey of highs and lows that you go through and heartbreak and then get back up again. And that is the story we all have, depending on how far we take it. And it's up to us. Where do we want to stop on that journey, or do we want to just continue on, knowing that if we just push a little further, we'll get to those moments that ultimately give us everything that we could ever have dreamed of and more.
Exactly. Exactly. You have the experience with Larry, and it's that you made the right choice to pursue the path that you were pursuing. Flash forward a little bit, you're now a working writer, a working filmmaker. What was the first aha moment that now everything's running as perhaps you envisioned it or dreamed about it? But what was the sort of turning point where you realize, hey, this is my life?
We define our lives, especially as creative, we define our lives by projects so often. We look at, because we have so many
Mhm.
projects. As a writer, as a filmmaker, as a producer, whatever, we want to kind of put our label. We look at, okay, what was that project that got me here? What was that project that sort of got me into the level where before I wasn't at that level? And to be honest, the project that really put me there was when Will I Am trusted me to take a story that he had incepted with this other writer, and it was the time it was called Zombie Nation, but it became Masters of the Sun. And I met with Will through a mutual friend, and it was just one of those moments where we're just kind of riffing for half an hour, and I'm showing him different comics, and I had never written a comic. I had been developing and producing comics for TV and film with one of the big indie publishers. I had already developed and built this comic book Sunday community that at the time was still pretty big. We had 2010 was a peak when we were at San Diego Comic Con with a giant panel that we filled the room with. And so I went in there confidently, but also really sort of a bit, I won't say hesitantly, because I was confident I knew I could do it. I just knew, because I just come off editing a feature film, and it was my very first feature. And that's another fun story where it was like, have you ever edited a feature before? This is Corbin Burnson I worked with. And I was like, yeah, I have, which I had, but it wasn't like the sort of feature that we were going into, which was like
Sure.
a big movie with big actors and script notes and all that fun stuff. It was more on this was still an indie film, but it was, so I had felt that confidence of going and delivering that movie, right? Going in and going, all right, I've never done this before, but I know I can do it. Went in, delivered the movie. It's called Christian Mingle. It was on Netflix and all, right? Stay in tune with my sort of strange spiritual journey connected to my oscillation between Judaism and Christianity. But it was just that confidence. I felt like, okay, yeah, I can do this. Like, I know comic books, I know storytelling, just finished a film. And here's Will saying, can you make this a reality? And I said, yeah. And he's, what do you need? And what does anyone need when they need to do something? You need money. You need to hire people. You need to also get paid yourself. And I said to Will, I said, look, I just need a budget to make the project happen, and I'll figure it out. I've got some great artists that I think I can pull into this project, and let's see what happens. I really just threw it out there. I never thought it was going to happen. I'll be honest. The lawyers went back and forth, negotiated the deal. It actually was a relatively quick negotiation. And next thing I know, I'm off to the races. And that's a story unto itself, because that was a really interesting project that ultimately got published by Marvel.
Mm.
That was that moment, right? When do you know that you entered the big leagues? Like,
Mm.
when do you know that you just got called up from the bench or called up from the farm league to join the real teams, the big
Yeah.
teams? And that was the project. That was that moment of, okay, I'm doing it. Like, this is for real. Like, I know that I have the caliber to be able to deliver at that level. And I know that I come hell or high water, I'm going to just keep doing it. And whatever those next projects are, and it'll find its way. So that was that project. I have to give big shout out to Will for having faith in this kid that had really never written a comic book before, but knew that he could. And I did. And now I am.
And what do you think he saw in you that really provided the confidence to him that you could get the job done?
I don't know. He's a unique guy. He's a really smart guy, and he's a really intuitive person.
Hmm.
And I think when we met, we both have this ADHD energy, as you probably can tell off going off on tangents and getting caught up in things. And then I'm like, ooh, shiny squirrel over there. So there was that sort of energy that we had together, and it was a creative energy that we were present with. And he saw that I knew what I was talking about. And I told him, I said, I can make this happen. We'll figure this out. And I don't know, he took a chance. It's one of those crazy stories, right? Where there's that time where someone just takes a chance. What did Larry Cohen see? He saw that I could do a documentary. He knew that I could go, and Larry was just an independent filmmaker who just would go off and pick up a camera and go make movies. And I guess I've always been drawn to people that have that same sort of mentality of let's just go and do it. So I think that was really the moment. It was that same, and then that other side of it, like how I started this all was the moment signing my name on a book that I gave to Stan with Will and Tab and Apple. That was a really incredible moment. It's just, wow, like here's this guy that I always looked up to as being this godfather of comic books, of modern comics, and what I always aspired in some way to be a part of and to connect with. And here I am, him saying, it's, hey, can you guys sign my comic?
Yeah.
That's, wow, man. Just like that's that moment of okay, I'm here. We're doing this.
Good. That's super cool. That's super cool. And yeah, it's like I'm not pushing Stan as a hero on you, but it's like where else? That's the pinnacle of somebody. It's a really cool moment. On that tip, then, so you've established yourself in the field. You're pursuing the path you want to pursue that feels aligned with all of the moments and experiences that have led up to that point. How did you get to Web3?
Ha! That's a funny story. So it does connect to Masters of the Sun in a strange way, as Will is a very tech-oriented sort of person. And my own self being a technical filmmaker. As a film editor, you are and camera, but I'm a like editor. That's the craft of filmmaking that I come from. You're working with computers. That's it. We're not cutting film anymore. So I was always like fingers in that space. I worked for an early internet company in 1999. We were doing
Oh
web
wow.
streaming. We were doing video streaming in 1999. I was the one in charge of the video production office, figuring out compression and decompression. Like it was early on understanding the sort of what is the scope of the internet. And I always I don't want to say look down on it. I was like, I want to make movies that are on big screens. I didn't want to go into the YouTube world of it all. That was not, I was a filmmaker. Like it was what I was meant to do. But I've always been tech adjacent. I've always understood technology. I've always known how to like even get into a computer and build it and rebuild it and install hard drives. Like I had to do this and do all that kind of stuff. And I had worked for a company called Millennium Films for many years as an independent contractor on the editorial side. My main job was really the stock footage library, all the assets. The last project I did there was a film called Search and Destroy that was 60% stock footage. So this all ties together. I'm not completely off on a tangent because at the time we had just done Masters of the Sun. Masters of the Sun had an AR component and a VR component. I worked very closely with the VR team on building out the storytelling with them. The AR component was basically, I was a company called, I think it was called Trigger that did it. They did an incredible job of the project. My buddy Sean was the project lead on that, and they just did an amazing job. And I was just, wow, like what we can do with this sort of transmedia. We were so ahead of the curve at that time. This was 2017. So it didn't really get the shine that it could have. It did. Like TechCrunch did a piece. It was like media wise, there was a lot of media coverage. You can Google it, right? Masters of the Sun, AR. There's an interview, and I'm there with Vulture, and I look terrible. God, just look at my afro there. Anyway, yeah, God, those are the bad old days of drinking until 2 a.m. I've since become sober. I look back on that and I was like, that was the old Ben. But what it showed me was the power of technology again to when I was first starting out and going, wow, I can have a camera and I can have my editing gear, Final Cut, and I can edit a movie in my bedroom. And here is AR and VR and all these new components and how we can bring them all together. Masters of the Sun finished. We were going to do Masters of the Sun 2, ended up just not working out. But at the time, I was still at Millennium Films. So this is where it weaves in. At Millennium Films, I have been talking to them a lot about wanting to do television. And one of my good friends, Ruslan, who was the head of the marketing department, he was just getting into all the blockchain and crypto. And I was aware of blockchain. I had gone to some sort of class on it or something presented from a music perspective for whatever reason. It was just like a strange little thing of, oh, this would be interesting. I want to understand what this is about. And Ruslan was like, man, we should do an ICO for the Undisputed. We should raise a ton of money and just go make the TV series for ourselves. And I was like, wow, that sounds incredible. Okay. And we got a lot of great support from the son of the owner of Millennium Films, Yariv. He really saw the future of that. And I got to give him credit for that. And really got behind us. And it was then that also side of looking at Masters of the Sun and saying, hey, what if we do a comic book, build it into an AR app, and then that AR app is actually a game, and that when you play the game, you own the NFTs. This was 2018. So we were like talking about gaming and NFTs and world building and metaverse, like massive metaverse game building in 2018 with interoperability of how we would bring it from this lightweight AR game and your character that you could then carry over into a large sort of Grand Theft Auto game. And I was always pushing us, let's get it right first on the smaller scale. Let's get it into this sort of this where you can scan it and see how it works and done. So we actually, and I don't know, let me see if I can show you. So we actually made physical coins. These are Blanket Cash. So this is Undisputed was the project we were doing. So these were minted. This is cryptocurrency. We were going to launch it. This was the ICO, and you would actually get a physical coin. This is the silver one, and I have a gold one as well. And this is the prototype. This is the very first one. So I have one of the few prototypes of the.
Cool.
So the Bulgarian mint actually minted these.
Wow.
So it's a crazy project. Super ahead of the time, man. 2018, I'm at Comic-Con showing people this at the Wired Cafe Lounge, where everyone, is supposed to be tech savvy. And I'm going, hey, check out this cool blockchain project we're building. This is the future, NFTs and gaming. And nobody was calling it Web3. This was cryptocurrency and ICOs, which in the reality was still late. Blockchain and crypto had been around for some time. So we didn't think we were too ahead of it. And ICOs at the time were really popping off. But unfortunately, there was that bear market that hit in 2018, and everybody took a shellacking on it, and the project went away. And I put a pin in all that, and I said, I got to really focus on what I can do right now. I got to really focus on traditional storytelling in Hollywood and in the space that I know best. And I would love it to, at some point, be able to bridge these two worlds together. So that was where that sort of happened. And then I got another opportunity randomly pulled in because I was talking about on Clubhouse. You remember those days?
Yeah.
So my buddy Dimitri Vegas, who's a big DJ, I kept telling Dimitri, I was like, dude, future is NFTs, blockchain, music. Like, this is the future. And this is before Steve Aoki had jumped on the blockchain train and was doing all his stuff. I was telling Dimitri about all this. And we did a little Clubhouse and talked about NFTs and music and all this. This was back in 2020. This was before the pandemic, I think. Or maybe it was during. Anyway. And then he introduced me to some folks, and we launched a project called the Chihuahua. So that was really my just jump off into just knee deep in it. Let's go. Let's make some cartoon NFTs and get into this Web 3, Web 2.5, whatever we're calling it. I don't know. Web, But yeah, storytelling, man. That's it.
Dude, in many ways, then it's one of the cool things I heard you say was how you were bridging those two worlds of traditional Hollywood and crypto Web3.
Yeah,
And in many ways, you could say it's akin to what you were talking about earlier of bringing different types of voices and different types of stories
yeah.
into traditional Hollywood. It's just same thing relating storytelling to a different slant, a different avenue.
Man, you nailed it. It's funny. I have so many projects and so many different things I'm working on, but they're all like a web, all interrelated, and they're all connected in one way or another. There's a thread tying them all together. I have a call tonight on my AI project. So, yeah, my fingers are in everything from blockchain and NFTs to machine learning to writing Marvel comics, making cartoons, directing another documentary right now on hip hop. Yeah, to me, it's all storytelling, and ultimately, the stories I want to tell are the stories that are the ones that don't get heard, and I want to connect those stories to the human experience, spirituality, and our deeper connection to community as a whole. And not the buzzy community that often gets thrown around in the Web3 and blockchain NFT space of when moon and we're a community. And it's really about how do we look at the similarities of who we are in our human experience and appreciate each other's cultures and appreciate each other's religions, music, whatever it is. We don't have to look at someone being other and loving something and say you're other and that scares me. It should be you're other and I want to learn more about it. You have an other. It should never be an it. And I was just watching, going back to Campbell, it's we need to look at each other as thous and not its. That's how wars happen. That's how death and murder and destruction, that's how the bad side of humanity, it comes to light when we look at its. And because we dehumanize and we take it out of nature. And instead we need to put it back into nature, and we need to look at ourselves as a cohesive ecosystem.
Just and each individual is just a piece of the larger collective. And
That's young, man. That's the unconscious. We're all connected through our collective unconscious. It's a big human tapestry. It's
and,
the
and
unknown.
yes, and to your point, not in the buzzwordy community, but I think what an interesting way in which terms have converged on the word community in the quote unquote future of the internet, whereby community is what sustains and helps hopefully progress society in some ways. And now what it means to be part of a community ideally is expanding to this global community, but with the DNA of these, small towns, if you will.
Yes, the small town is where we all live, but we all are a part of that large picture show, the
Yeah.
big stage, whatever's on that stage. And I think it's really about definitions and understanding the definitions. And it's also about understanding commerce and what the future of commerce really is. And commerce for the sake of exchanging ideas, and commerce for the sake of exchanging energy, and not to be woo woo about it. But I mean, it's very much that's why it's called currency. It is energy. Your money has energy, it moves. You get it for doing this. You put in physical labor, you get $15 or $20 an hour. You have a measurement, everything is measured, and we live in a place of measurements. And how do we find happiness in measurement? It's this idea of bliss is immeasurable. How do you measure that? How do you say, oh, if I only had $1 billion, I can measure my happiness? That's the challenge. Face that every day. It's we could always have more money. We could always have more things. I don't. For me, things are books. I love having books. My girlfriend's like, "You got another book?" Well, yeah, I'm always ordering books or BattleTech minis. Me and my son love to play BattleTech. But it's the things that give us a sense of grounding and connection and whatever that is. And we can't live in our books either. That's the big thing too. You can read and read, but if you don't take that knowledge and put it back into the world, it becomes stopped. It's like a kink. You
Yeah.
have to constantly be cycles. So that's commerce. That's where the future of commerce needs to be. We need to stop kinking everything, and we need to focus on these cyclical patterns that allow flow. And that's where the currency needs to come from. I hope that's the future. That to me would be this ideology of what Web3 could bring, right? This idea of a decentralized, centralized system that connects the dots between what we've come from and where we're going.
We basically just need to clear out all the chakras between those.
Yeah, we need to take a giant crap. I think that's it. The world needs an enema, man.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Be on that on that tip of the future, is there anything specific that you can talk about that you have upcoming that you're excited to plug, or that
Yeah,
you can mention?
absolutely. So wrapping this out, I got a minting of my first ebook that will be an NFT book on the Soul Type platform. I love those guys, Paco and Juan, that whole crew. Soul Type they're on the Solana blockchain, and it's a book called Wriglin. We could do a whole podcast on that about how the story came about and my son named the character. And again, it goes back to the full circle of this is a father-son story. And it was a story I originally was starting to develop to write about me and my dad, but it was written about me and my son here, this is my boy. This is Liam, who is also the creator of Wriglin.
Awesome.
Yeah, when he was 4 or 5, was it 4 or 5? I don't know. He said, I said, what should we name our character? And he said, Wriglin. There you go. So March 1st, we're minting on Soul Type, and you can check it out. It's just, I think, soultype.io/Wriglin.
Awesome.
So that's coming up. And yeah, follow me on Instagram, follow me on Earl Writer, LinkedIn, Earl, and I'm on Twitter there too, Earl Writer. I'm mostly just retweeting stuff on Twitter. I'm like, oh, someone liked our Spider-Man thing. Someone liked our retweet. So
Awesome.
that's about it.
Viet, thank you very much for the time, and really appreciate the introspective chat and go into all corners of the atmosphere and the galaxy with this one. So really appreciate it. And again, thank you.
Steve or Steven, B or Ben, right? We all have our names, our call signs. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate it. This has been a really fun one because it's really the first time I've gotten to unpack a lot of the scope that I love to talk about and create, and ultimately who I am and where I'm going, and what I hope people get to know about me as a creative. That's what I would like to put out there, and I hope my body of work supports that.
I think it does. And yeah, that's the aim of these chats. So the fact that it resonates with you too is a good thing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, man.
You got it. Thanks for listening to another episode of Lights, Camera, Crypto, a podcast produced by Matt Bogart and Essential Media. Music by Brian Duncan and Kareem Imes. If you enjoyed this experience, be sure to rate and subscribe to our show, and to follow @Sladden and @Essential Media for additional content.